fair and reasonable information policy is doing so because information wants to be free. We're fighting because we want to be free. Not free to pirate your creative work, but free to own devices that don't let remote authorities set policy against our will and against our interests. Free to use networks that don't spy on us in case we're infringing a copyright. Free to communicate in private without having to worry that our personal lives will be made public in the name of protecting copyright. DRM doesn't work, and every time we try to make it work, we end up inventing rootkits or rootkit-like technologies. Sony DMG famously shipped 6 million CDs that contain stealth malware that patched your kernel to allow them to run anti-copying processes without the OS seeing them or their associated files. Essentially, they punched this huge hole in the middle of your computer's immune system, and almost immediately, virus writers started cranking out malware that could cloak itself in the Sony rootkit. And games companies keep on repeating this lunacy. The 3DS that came out this year is a decent enough little pocket computer until you realize that every time you turn it on, it tries to connect to a network even if you tell it not to. When it gets to a network, it tries to download new firmware even if you don't want it to. And if it downloads new firmware and discovers that you've jailbroken it, it bricks your device. On PCs, Ubisoft's essential position is that when you play a game, they own your computer and every process running on it and should have the authority to inspect its entire internal workings. Now, those are the most egregious offenders, but they're hardly the only ones. Everyone from Hulu to Amazon Unbox to iBooks are trying to find ways to take over your computer and demanding that OS vendors and hardware companies build in the hooks that allow processes to run without the user's permission, even if the user doesn't want them there. So I'm a science fiction writer, and I write science fiction novels, not science fiction movies. And I go to see science fiction movies, and I often revel in the many differences. And the difference that always really gets up my butt is the self-destructing rocket ship. You've all seen this. There's a fight on the bridge, and someone slips, and their elbow hits a button, and a funny voice that sounds eerily like Margaret Thatcher after her accent training starts counting down from 10 to the ship's irrevocable explosion. Now, I'm not an aerospace engineer, but when I see this, I think, wouldn't that be a better rocket ship if it wasn't designed to explode? Now, wouldn't our devices be better devices if they weren't designed to be rooted so that scumbags and creeps can watch what you do, control you, and look at your stuff? And on the intermediary side, we've got Viacom suing YouTube and demanding that courts take away YouTube's privacy flag because pirates might use it to hide uploads from enforcementware. But I use YouTube to send, and its privacy flag, to send videos of my toddler in the bath in my tiny flat in London to my parents at home in Toronto. Why should my capacity to conduct my personal life in private be subordinated to Viacom's business model? And it gets worse. In the UK, France, and New Zealand, they've passed internet disconnection laws that, yes, require ISPs to disconnect your internet connection if your IP address is named in a series of unsubstantiated copyright complaints. Now, the UN calls internet access a human right, and it's not hard to see why. My wife, Alice, who's just quit her job, but before she quit her job, she was working at Channel 4, one of Britain's public broadcasters, and she was their Commissioner for Education, and she worked with a lot of research on what networks did for families. And what she discovered through some of that research was that if you take the most vulnerable families in Britain, people living in public housing in the post-industrial north, and you compare like-for-like families where the only difference is that one of them has internet access, so the family with internet access has markedly better outcomes on every axis you can imagine. They have better nutrition, better social mobility, their kids get better grades, they have better jobs, they have more spending money, they're more civically engaged. In every way that you can imagine, their lives are improved by network access. Is there anyone in this room who'd have a job if we took away your home internet? And we're talking about taking away this network access, not from convicted pirates, but from people who happen to share an IP address with someone who's been accused of piracy. I don't think science fiction writers are necessarily very good predictors of the future, but there are two predictions that I think are very easy for me to make with some confidence. The first prediction is that copying is never, ever, ever going to get harder. Hard drives aren't going to get larger and bulkier and less capacious and more expensive. Networks aren't going to get harder to use and slower. There will never be fewer people who know how to type movie name BitTorrent into Google. From here on in, copying just gets easier. Your children will marvel at how hard copying was in 2011. My second prediction is that everything we do in the physical world will increasingly require, not have, but require some online components. You and I and our children are increasingly inhabiting a world in which internet policy affects every single aspect of our lives. And copyright law's scope is make an orderly, well-functioning marketplace for creative work, not govern every corner of human experience. This year, technology allows revolutionaries in the Middle East to coordinate to challenge despotic rulers, and technology allows the secret police to figure out who to round up, imprison, torture, and execute. If copyright furtherance requires tilting the balance of technology to make the citizen's job harder and the secret policeman's job easier, we're doing copyright wrong. I'm a novelist. I pay my mortgage with copyright. I feed my family with copyright. And I really, really believe that we can make copyrights that pay artists without requiring absurdities like copy-proof this or building a surveillance state into the fabric of the information society. I mean, just look at what copyright was in the earliest years of America. They set up a copyright system where you got a 14-year copyright that could be renewed again for 14 years, but only by the creator. And so what that meant is, you turn up at a publisher's office and say, I wrote this book, I think it's really good, and they read it and they go, yeah, it's pretty good, we'll give you a rating for it. And then they publish it, and it would be a bestseller. And 14 years later, the copyright would be about to expire. And they come back to you and they go, could you please renew this copyright for us? And you say, sure, but I want your kidney and your firstborn. We can make copyrights that ensure that people who create stuff get money. And they don't necessarily and can't involve surveillance. They can't involve this kind of control. We need to look for solutions like that today, and I think we'll find them. But I'll tell you what, if the only way to keep my trade alive is to redesign the devices that fill our pockets, run our cars, carry our love notes, and comprise our entire present-day system of political and civic engagement so that they spy on us and betray us, then I'm just going to go out and get a real job. Because I want to be free more than I want to be a writer. I want my daughter to, I'm Eastern European ancestry, so I do this when I get mixed up. I want my daughter to be free, I want my nation to be free, and I want our future to be free. If you agree, then take this back to your jobs and your politicians, join organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, boycott CRM platforms, get mouthy with your boss and your investors. We can secure livelihoods for creative people, and we can preserve technology's power to liberate. Let's keep the creative industries where they belong, on the side of free speech, free assembly, and freedom of conscience. Thank you.